There is a creature alive today who has survived millions of years of evolution without change, without passion, and without logic. It lives to kill. A mindless eating machine. It will attack and devour anything. It is as if God created the devil and gave him jaws.
On June 20th, 1975, Steven Spielberg's Jaws arrived in theaters and scared moviegoers out of the water. Considered the original summer blockbuster, Jaws had an impact on pop culture almost immediately. At the time of its release, Jaws became the highest-grossing film of all time, even though it got overtopped just 2 years later from a little movie called Star Wars. But the moment Jaws started breaking box office records, producers around the world started thinking of their own giant monster ripoffs. For a lot of the Jaws ripoffs, quality was usually ripped out. Most producers wanted to strike while the iron was hot, and made cheap movies that would have a one-word title and a scary movie poster, and that's about it. For example, the legendary film I'm sure everyone has heard of just 2 years after Jaws, named Dogs. I'm sure you can't guess the premise of the movie by the title, so let me tell you that Dogs was about killer dogs. But actually during the Jaws knockoff whirlwind that lasted over a decade, some of the replicas were actually pretty good. From the so bad it's good to actually just good, here are my top 5 Jaws ripoffs.
This motion picture does not cater to fantasy. You will see nature's most savage man-eating animal. By its size alone, it can overpower and devour any human. Grizzly. 18 feet of man-eating, gut-crunching terror. The deadliest jaws on land belong to Grizzly.
The first entry on this list, ironically, was the first Jaws ripoff to hit US theaters. Less than a year after Jaws, on May 16, 1976, William Girdler's Grizzly hit screens around the country and was rewarded by becoming one of the highest-grossing independent productions in film history. Widely considered by some as being nothing but Jaws on the land, Grizzly is often criticized as being a thinly veiled ripoff of the now classic shark movie. However, there was no doubting the film's success, because despite the blatant ripoff and mainly negative reviews, Grizzly was the top-grossing independent film of 1976, earning nearly $38 million worldwide, and held that record until Halloween was released 2 years later in 1978. The plot of Grizzly is not really difficult to figure out, but basically it is about a park ranger's attempts to kill an 18-foot-tall, 2,000-pound, man-eating grizzly bear that terrorizes a forest eating tourists. Sound familiar? Despite the fact that it was cheaply made and the 18-foot-tall monster bear never actually looks different than any other bear, the movie is a lot of fun. You know what you're getting into when you hear a movie titled Grizzly that you know is a Jaws ripoff. But one thing that actually makes it better than Jaws, yes, there is actually something. You literally see a real-life bear on set with the actors. Even the most trained bear is still pretty scary, and it's a lot harder to stay away from a bear than a shark. But the reason I really enjoyed this movie was because it isn't trying to be more than what it is, which is the worst thing you can do with a monster horror movie. Grizzly just wants us all to enjoy watching this bear kill and eat people via the most gruesome ways possible. To make things even better, the grizzly bear that stalks these woods seems to have been watching a lot of slasher movies, because the bear has a tendency to silently sneak up behind people when they least expect it and grab them in ridiculous ways. As a prime example of bad taste, low budget, exploitation cinema, Grizzly is hard to beat, and that's why it's number 5 on this list.
Each year, 10,000 tourists visit Ocean Beach. This summer, Ocean Beach has attracted something else. To bring destruction and death. Tentacles.
Tentacles is terrible. I'm getting that out of the way from the jump. But the reason it's on this list is because of how shamelessly and awfully the film rips off Jaws. Makes it almost a must-watch. There are parts that are literally taken from Jaws, and they fit it in by talking about an octopus rather than a shark. Jaws has everything building up to a day on a holiday weekend when a ton of tourists are going to be on the beach. Tentacles has everything building up to a big boat race. In both films, something could have been done to have stopped this, but greedy politicians prevented it because, well, we need the money.
Amity, as you know, means friendship.
But the best part is that they have a ripoff of Quint's iconic monologue from Jaws. Instead of being about the US Indianapolis,
Japanese submarine slammed 2 torpedoes into our side, Chief.
It's about the great idea of getting a pair of orcas so they can go kill the evil octopus. But this particular scene has been mocked online for years, because it sounds that one of the characters wants to have sex with these whales. It's truly one of the highlights of trash cinema. It is played so incredibly serious, and it is so incredibly awful, the movie is worth seeing just for that. The monologue literally ends with, "Well, I gotta go now." Despite the film having ridiculous scenes, it has an amazing cast. John Huston, Shelley Winters, and the legendary Henry Fonda. While none of their performances are setting the world on fire, it is pretty cool to see big actors in such a shit movie, or at least I think so. But despite the famous names, the real star of the movie is the octopus. We get tentacles lifting people up and dragging them down in the water. We get a weird octopus head flying at insane speeds through the ocean, destroying sailboats. But unfortunately, making the movie even worse, is that you barely see the octopus. There's a lot of talking about the monster and not a lot of showing of the monster, which is another Jaws-ism, except Tentacles really makes it their own, with their terrible writing, and why am I doing this acting. The real highlights, if you can call it that, is the idea to get 2 whales to kill the octopus as the climax of the movie. Accompanied by an orchestral theme that then morphs into what sounds like a western showdown, 2 hand puppets tear apart a real octopus. I have no clue if the real octopus was alive, or they just picked it up from the fish market, but it is the perfect bizarre ending to this movie.
At first, no one believed it. Now, no one will forget it. Alligator.
From the so bad it's good, we now reach the actually just good. Alligator is just a fun B-horror movie that is entertaining because they know exactly what they are trying to do, which is basically, let's make Jaws in the city. Alligator takes its basic story from one of the most discussed urban legends, the idea that there are alligators living in the sewers of large cities. The movie starts with a little girl buying a baby alligator at a fair in Florida while on vacation. I was thinking that there's no way this is possible, but being in Florida and Louisiana recently, buying a baby alligator is the least weird thing you could do there. When the family returns home to Chicago, the girl's animal-phobic father promptly flushes the baby alligator down the toilet and into the city sewers. Like Leonardo or Michelangelo, the party dude, the alligator begins living in the sewers. While stuck down there, the alligator eats discarded carcasses of animals that are used in illegal experimentation that are also dumped into the sewers. Sure enough, the alligator begins to mutate, but unlike the Ninja Turtles, the alligator becomes a ravenous monster and begins eating people. The remains are discovered by police detective David Madison, played by Robert Forster, and this battle is the main subject of the film, with Detective Madison trying to figure out what is happening until he discovers that it is a monster alligator. Alligator is what Anaconda tried to be but failed at. The alligator effects are solid, combining a real alligator on small sets or various animatronic shots. The effects in Anaconda look like a bad Sci-Fi Channel original movie that come and go without anyone caring. Robert Forster feels genuine, unlike J-Lo or Jon Voight, who is just horrendous. In fact, Forster was so good in Alligator, he got another gig because of his performance, in a little film called Jackie Brown, directed by Quentin Tarantino. Tarantino also said in 2019 that Crawl might be his favorite movie ever, which is just another monster alligator movie, so alligators might just be his thing. But still, Alligator has an 86% score on Rotten Tomatoes, which is ridiculously high for a monster B-horror movie, but that just shows how good it is. Alligator is a lot of fun, and in fun fact, before he was famous, Bryan Cranston worked as a special effects assistant on the film, in charge of making and rigging the alligator guts for the film's finale.
The ancient Romans called him Orca or Canis, Latin for bringer of death. He is without challenge the most powerful animal on the globe, the killer whale. An innocent creature is destroyed by an act of human cruelty, and the ultimate battle of man against nature begins.
After seeing Jaws, Dino De Laurentiis, the legendary producer of over 500 films, including most of the Hannibal Lecter movies, was determined to make a movie about a killer fish that was, quote, tougher and more terrible than the great white. Ultimately, a killer whale was decided upon. In many ways, Orca is your typical killer animal movie, but unlike Grizzly and Tentacles, it doesn't blatantly rip off Jaws. The filmmakers were clearly striving for something a little bit deeper. De Laurentiis assembled a first-rate team, including director Michael Anderson, and a cast including Richard Harris, Charlotte Rampling, Bo Derek, and William Sampson. And while there are some similarities between Orca and Jaws, I mean, it will be pretty difficult not to have it with two killer monsters in the ocean, Orca creates a different point of view, where the monster animal actually becomes the protagonist. Captain Nolan, played by Richard Harris, is searching for a great white shark to sell to a local aquarium. He and his crew are attacked by a shark, and are actually saved by an orca. Shifting his focus over to the orca as his new prize, Nolan harpoons a female whale, which was carrying an unborn whale fetus, killing them both. The male orca watches in horror as its mate and unborn baby are killed and dragged aboard the boat, and it screams in rage. The male orca attacks the boat, and Captain Nolan cuts the female free, heading back to the shore. This sets up the plot for the rest of the movie, with Orca flipping the idea of Moby Dick, with the whale hunting down the captain. Captain Nolan is haunted by what he's done, feeling sympathy for the whale, being that his own wife and unborn child were killed in a car crash. But he still must fight the orca to survive. Orca is sorely underappreciated film that deserves to be seen outside of just a ripoff. While Jaws inspired it, it's still unique enough to stand apart with its own identity. With the success of the documentary Blackfish discussing the controversy of captive orcas, as well as multiple documentaries portraying the horror of whale hunting, Orca was way ahead of its time, and is actually pretty good, despite the 9% on Rotten Tomatoes. Bacalhau, which translates to cod, is a Brazilian parody of Jaws that came out the same year. The plot is about what you would expect. A terrible monster threatens the beach season, the cod from Guinea. To catch the dreaded fish, local authorities count on the expertise of a Portuguese oceanographer and a fearless fisherman that baits the cod with Amelia Rodrigues records. Rodrigues is apparently the best-selling Portuguese music artist in history, but I had no clue. I give them credit for mocking Jaws pretty quickly after the movie was released, but I think this was just supposed to be for the people in Brazil, because it's filled with Brazilian references and things that I had no idea what they were. But the movie poster is great. If you ever wanted to see dumb, fat Paulie from Rocky as a straight-laced detective, this is the film for you. The basic premise is that people are dying on the beach rather than in the water. Is it the sand? Is it a murderer? What could it be? Spoiler, it ends up being a sandworm monster, and nobody cares because the movie sucks, but the reason I wanted to mention it was because it probably has the best tagline for a Jaws ripoff. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, you can't get to it. While technically not a Jaws ripoff because it came decades later, there's no doubt the influence Jaws has on Tremors. I mean, even the poster is a carbon copy of the original. But while Tremors died a death at the box office when it came out, it has become a cult classic over the years. Tremors is the perfect combination of Jaws mixed with a western, and throwing in the fact that it was the best horror comedy until Shaun of the Dead, Tremors had to be on this list, even if it was too good to be called a ripoff.
There's something strange in the water at Lost River Lake. Something you can't see, something you can't feel, until it's too late. They're here, and they're hungry. Piranha.
It was easy to guess what would be number one on this list. Not only is Piranha just a good movie on its own, but Steven Spielberg said it was the best Jaws ripoff, and if anyone would know, it would be him. A man named Roger Corman, a director and producer, set up his own production company named New World Pictures in 1970, where they mainly created B films. One of the keys to the success of New World Pictures was exploiting a popular theme or subject and make it in their own way. With no money from marquee names, the draw of a low-budget film was purely the content. For their horror movies, they mainly wanted to exploit everything they could, so they would copy a movie and just make it more violent and with more nudity, which ended up being a recipe for success. In 1975, Corman was very interested in emulating the success of Jaws and hired multiple writers to come up with an idea. John Sayles was hired to clean up the original drafts of this idea of man-eating piranhas, and he decided to inject more humor, along with obvious elements of more violence and sex than the original Jaws. Director Joe Dante, who had started at New World Pictures editing trailers, had only one co-directing credit to his name before he was hired to direct Piranha. Dante, who would later go on to direct comedy-esque scary movies like Gremlins and The Howling, took a comedy approach to Piranha, using cues from the witty draft to create a parody that gave proper acknowledgement to Jaws. Corman knew that Universal would be releasing Jaws 2 in June of 1978, so he decided to release Piranha in August of that year to take advantage of the public's interest in aquatic horror. When Universal caught wind of the advertising campaign, which is a clever variation on the original Jaws one-sheet, they considered taking New World Pictures to court. However, Steven Spielberg, who had just seen either an early version of Piranha or just a preview, there are differing accounts, told Universal not to sue. Joe Dante recounted when Spielberg told Universal that Piranha was a parody or an homage to giant fish movies. Dante said he told them it didn't have anything to do with Jaws, and they were told to lay off. Spielberg was partially responsible for letting us have that movie. Universal lawyers were ultimately called off, and Piranha could help itself to a summer release. Piranha was released in the late summer and proved a huge success for New World Pictures, grossing around $16 million domestically. The story of a batch of militarized killer fish that gets loose and heads to a regional water park was just a bloody comedy that wasn't made a bunch before Piranha. Piranha would go on to make multiple sequels with Jaws star Richard Dreyfuss even making a cameo in the 2010 version, but none of the sequels or remakes were as fun as the original. And there you have it, from the sublime to the ridiculous, from the outhouse to the penthouse, we've reached the end of our wild journey through the land of shameless copycats. Let me know what your list would be, or if I missed out on any other movies that would be considered a Jaws ripoff. Thanks.